Hello there, my name is Jim Rawls, and I'm one of the leaders of the Holy Land Pilgrimage set for April of 2013. It's my great good fortune to be part of the leadership team with my old and dear friends, the Right Reverend Barry Beisner, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California, and his wife, the Reverend Dr. Ann Hallisey, Dean of Students at the Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley. In divvying up our responsibilities, Barry and Ann asked me to put together some materials to help prepare us for the pilgrimage that lies ahead. And what I came up with are several video presentations and a set of accompanying booklets. Well, recorded here for your viewing pleasure on YouTube are the video presentations. The first one, beginning now, is on the geography of the Holy Land. The second is on the history of the Holy Land, and the third one is a meditative survey of the sacred sites related to the life of Christ. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions, basic questions. What is the Holy Land, and what is a pilgrimage? Well, the Holy Land geographically is described as the nation of Israel, plus the adjoining Palestinian territories currently under Israeli occupation, plus portions of Jordan and Egypt. And these lands are holy because they have significant sites and significant meaning to three of the great Abrahamic faiths of mankind and womankind, which are, of course, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And considered as such, these lands are sacred to about half of the entire human race. They are sacred to us Christians, of course, because this is the land of the Incarnation. This is the land where our Savior was born and lived and died and rose again. And many of us are going there precisely because we desire to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, to see the land that was his homeland. The second question, what is a pilgrimage? Well, one of the simplest definitions of a pilgrimage is a journey that is both outward and inward, traveling outward through the landscape, but also traveling inward into our innermost being, into our heart, into our soul, and the deeper recesses of our mind. I like to think of a pilgrimage as rather like a sacrament. And you recall the definition of a sacrament, something that combines outward and visible elements with an inward and spiritual grace. The heart of a pilgrimage is that inward and spiritual grace which pilgrims are to be ever open to receive. But it's also important to consider the outward and visible elements of the lands to which our pilgrimage will take us. And it's very easy on pilgrimage to be distracted by those outward and visible elements, important as they are, and to forget that really the heart, the meaning, the essence of the pilgrimage experience is what is going on in our own souls as we are opening ourselves to receive the grace of God on this journey whenever and wherever it presents itself to us. Well, in our first presentation, we're going to be taking a look at the geography of the Holy Land. It's a very brief introduction, what I've called Getting the Lay of the Land. And since most of us are residents of Northern California, although a few of us are coming from other places in the U.S., but being primarily Californians, I thought it might be kind of fun for us to approach the geography of the Holy Land by comparing it with the geography of our own homeland here in California, going from the known, which is California, to the unknown, which is the Holy Land. I've thought of some 10 parallels between these two places. You may come up with several more, but I think the 10 that I've got so far are rather remarkable. First parallel, the overall dimensions between these two places. California's north-south dimension is far greater than its east-west dimension. I mean the distance from our northern border with Oregon down to our southern border with the nation of Mexico is far greater than the distance between our two neighboring states to the east, Nevada and Arizona, and the sea that lies to the west, namely the Pacific Ocean. In other words, we are decidedly tall and thin. Similarly, the Holy Land bears a similar set of dimensions. The distance from north to south is much greater than the distance from east to west. Traveling from the bordering nation in the north of Lebanon down to the southern border with Egypt, if you measure that distance, it's obviously far greater than the distance from the neighboring countries to the east of Syria and Jordan and the sea that lies to the west, namely the Mediterranean. The second parallel, based on the first one, I suppose, is that we have a great deal of waterfront property in both places. California is blessed with a magnificent coastline of some 1,200 miles of ocean frontage. And of course, most of our population here in California is concentrated in that coastal zone particularly from San Francisco down to Los Angeles and on to San Diego. Our largest metropolitan area is in Los Angeles on an ocean-fronting plain, which is called the Los Angeles Basin. But our political capital, Sacramento, lies to the interior. It's within the coastal valleys and interior valleys and plains that we have this tremendous agricultural production that makes California, by the way, the #1 agricultural state in the nation, leading in everything from asparagus and apricots to zucchini. And it's in those southern coastal valleys that the vast bulk of the nation's entire citrus crop is produced. Similarly, in the Holy Land, there's about 112 miles of scenic coastline. Within that coastal zone, most of Israel's population also is concentrated. Its largest urban area, Tel Aviv, is on a sea-fronting plain, but its political capital, self-proclaimed capital of Jerusalem, lies in the interior. And it's in the valleys and plains of Israel, as in California, that there is a great deal of agricultural production, and along the coastal valleys, especially in the south, but also in the north of Israel, are many citrus crops, and the bulk, indeed, of the entire nation's citrus crop, just as in California, lies in those coastal valleys. Third parallel is the climate between the Golden State and the Holy Land. There are many parallels. You see from this map that we are within the same climate zone. This is the Mediterranean climate zone, here highlighted in red, that California is in, and the Holy Land is in as well. And of course, in the Mediterranean climate zone, what that means is that there is a seasonal drought. In the summer months, as we know very well, we have hardly any, if any at all, rainfall, and our precipitation is almost entirely concentrated in the winter months. Similarly, in the Holy Land, same thing, dry summers, wet winters. And of course, you also recognize from this map that all of the areas highlighted in red, including the Mediterranean, California, central Chile, the Western Cape, and southern Australia, also happen to be the centers of the premium grape growing business worldwide, and we also share, therefore, a nice preference for a fine vintage. A fourth parallel between the Golden State and the Holy Land is the contrast within these two entities between the North and the South. We here in California are amused by the misdeeds of our wayward cousins down south. There's all kinds of prejudices and stereotypes among us Northern Californians as we look askance at our Southern California brothers and sisters, and of course they have similar prejudices and stereotypes as they look askance at us up here, particularly in the Bay Area. And those long-standing divisions and cultural perceptions and misperceptions have a root in physical reality. that Northern California physically is quite different from Southern California. You simply have to drive down the interstate from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, down to Disneyland perhaps, and you are well aware of that difference, and particularly if you're coming from up, let's say, in Red Bluff or Eureka, or points farther north. Heavily forested, redwood country, the Siskiyous, the High Sierra, a lot of rich forested lands in the north, and in the south you don't see that. You see sagebrush, you see the arid desert regions, and the rainfall certainly is concentrated, precipitation is concentrated in the north, far less in the arid south of California. In Southern California, you may remember, they have some unsettling seasonal winds, the very hot and dry Santa Ana winds that sometimes sweep from east to west into Southern California. Well, similarly, in the Holy Land, there is a long-standing historical division between the northern part and the southern part, particularly following the time of King Solomon, when the Promised Land was divided into two rival kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south, and the country remained divided, and different fates befell those two different kingdoms as recorded in the biblical record. And the historical difference between Israel in the north and Judah in the south is also, like in California, rooted in physical, geographical, climatic differences between that much moister, more fertile northern area, particularly, let's say, around the Galilean highlands, up in the Golan Heights, in the area around the Sea of Galilee, in the northern Jordan River Valley, and the far more arid regions down in the southern part of Israel. And by golly, in southern Israel today, as in Southern California, there are seasonal, hot, dry winds that sometimes sweep in from the deserts to the east across the southern part of Israel. These have a name. They're not the Santa Anas, as in California, but the Khamsin, similar kinds of winds in the Southlands in both areas. A fifth parallel has to do with the correcting of nature. This is a term from hydrologists, water engineers who have been engaged in California for, more than a century now, of moving water from where it naturally occurs to where demand has been artificially created through human settlement, through agriculture, through manufacturing and urban development. And those in the business of moving water around have used this rather arrogant term of correcting nature, as if nature was making a mistake by putting water where the people were not, or was it a mistake that we people put ourselves where the water was not? At any rate, whatever. In the Golden State, we have a series of major water delivery systems, the Federal Project, the Central Valley Project, the California State Water Project, municipal water projects bringing water, for example, from the Owens River Valley far above Los Angeles, and a municipal delivery system down to the parched Southland. This moving of water in California is a huge part of our history, and if you know that history, you know that there have been pretty serious conflicts between Northern Californians, or people to the north, with their southern relatives who are taking water from their regions. The Owens River Valley area is perhaps most noted for that, where the farmers of the Owens Valley were dynamiting the water delivery pipes that were pumping water down into Los Angeles. In our own times, we're continually wary of the building of a peripheral canal to deliver additional waters through state or federal systems into Southern California. Well, in the Holy Land, same thing applies. Water delivery systems, water projects have been built in the last 50 years, taking water from the wetter north to the drier south, particularly pumping water out of the northern parts of the Jordan River and around the Sea of Galilee, delivering it into coastal enclaves for agricultural, urban, and industrial development. And like in California, this movement of water has caused conflict, not so much within the state of Israel, but between Israel and its neighbors just to the east. Syria and Jordan have been very concerned about the diversion of water from the Jordan River. And indeed, this was one of the issues that led to the famous Six-Day War in 1967 between Israel and its neighbors. A sixth parallel has to do more with the waterways naturally occurring in these two places. Here in the Golden State, we have a couple of very prominent lakes, one in the north and one in the south. In the north, of course, is the beautiful high Sierra Lake Tahoe, surrounded by the forested lands of the Sierra. In the south, we have a less scenic, highly saline, relatively shallow lake called the Salton Sea. That is indeed our largest lake. And flowing through the heartland of California, our major natural water delivery entity is the Sacramento River that flows, of course, from the Siskiyous and the Sierra and the Coast Range down into the Sacramento Valley, carrying water on into the Delta, out into San Francisco Bay, and ultimately out through the Golden Gate. Likewise, in the Holy Land, there are two prominent lakes. In the north is the Sea of Galilee, which is, as you will see, and I think enjoy, the scenic qualities of that beautiful lake there, nestled beneath the Golan Heights. In the south is the less scenic, much more shallow, and highly saline lake, the Dead Sea. And the primary natural river in the Holy Land is the southward flowing Jordan River. Many, many, many parallels here again between California, I think, and the Holy Land. Seventh of those parallels is the geology of these two places. Here in California, we are all too well aware, we sit astride some major fault zones, most particularly the San Andreas Fault that cuts down along the northern coast of California, cuts right through Bodega Head in Sonoma County, down through Tomales Bay and Bolinas Lagoon, cuts back into the San Francisco Peninsula, and down on through the Salinas Valley, Southern California, and exits out into the Sea of Cortez in Mexico, or the Gulf of California. And of course, movement along that fault zone between the two great tectonic plates of the North American plate and the northward moving Pacific plate are what cause the periodic earthquakes that shake, rattle, and roll us Californians. Holy Land, yep, same thing. There is also a major fault zone that cuts right through Israel, coming out of Lebanon to the north, through Israel, down through the Red Sea, cutting back into Africa, and forming in Africa what is known as the Great Rift Valley. In the Holy Land, it's called simply the Jordan Rift Valley, but it's all a part of the same fault zone. And likewise, there, when there is movement along those fault lines, the Holy Land suffers as well from periodic earthquakes. An eighth parallel consists of the waterways that lie within these two deeply depressed fault zones. I mentioned a moment ago that Tomales Bay and Bolinas Lagoon up in Marin County lie right in that fault zone, right on the San Andreas Fault. The photograph on your left shows the Crystal Springs reservoirs along the San Francisco Peninsula, which are very, very obviously in the trough of the San Andreas Fault. You view those as you're going down the freeway heading perhaps to SFO. Likewise, in the Holy Land, along the deeply depressed Jordan Rift Valley lie the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Salton Sea to the south. Within both of those depressions in California and in the Holy Land are some of the lowest points imaginable. Here in the Golden State, lying in one of the fault zones to the interior in Southern California is Death Valley. The surface of the water in Death Valley, the surface of the land, I'm sorry, not much water there. The surface of the water in Death Valley, can't say it again. The surface of the land in Death Valley is about 282 feet below sea level. It is the lowest point in North America. In the Holy Land, the surface of the Dead Sea, which is water, lies about 1,300 feet below sea level, which is the lowest point on the surface of the earth. I mean, think of the parallel here. Think of just the parallel in the language. In the Golden State, you can go to see the lowest point in North America, Death Valley. In the Holy Land, you can go to see the lowest point on the entire planet, the Dead Sea. Ninth parallel, bird life, something that's very close to my heart as a birder, as a bird watcher. Here in California, we're blessed to be a part of the Great Pacific Flyway, where we have many hundreds of thousands of winter migrants who come out of their summer nesting and breeding sites to the far north, going all the way up into Alaska and the Arctic, coming down into California for winter months, or some of them even heading farther south, passing through California to points in South America. We have recorded in California, within the boundaries of California, a little more than 500 different species of birds. Likewise, in the Holy Land, there is also the blessing of a major north-south flyway that cuts right through the heart of the Holy Land, with many birds coming out of the north, heading down into Africa and point south for the winter months, and summering up there again in the far north of Europe and Asia, and again up into the Arctic. It's estimated something like 500 million birds pass through the Holy Land each year on the annual migration along the Great Flyway that passes through that area. And how many species of birds have been identified in the Holy Land? If you guessed around 500, just like California, you would be absolutely correct. The same number of bird species are found in California as are found in Israel. And finally, a 10th parallel between these two places is the human geography, the peopling of the place. Both the Golden State and the Holy Land could be considered crossroads locations. Here in California, we have had the initial settlement coming from the north, which would be, of course, the Native Americans. The first Homo sapiens to live in the Golden State were those native people, the indigenous people who came out of originally out of Siberia, we think, coming across the Bering Strait, the great land bridge that was there, coming down into North America and eventually into California. When the Europeans first arrived, there were already 100 different Indian cultures in California from this earliest migration, thousands, perhaps 10 to 12,000 years ago. The first Europeans came from the south. The Spanish missionaries, the Franciscans, in the mid and late 1700s, beginning to settle California, encountering the indigenous population that was here. Later, of course, other Latin American, Spanish-speaking peoples have continued to come into California from Mexico, from Central America, from South America, constituting today more than a third of the state's population, the Hispanic population. It was in the middle of the 19th century that a migration began from the east, heading west into California. Of course, I'm talking about the 49ers, the great gold rush population that flooded in the mid-19th century, and from Europe as well, coming from farther east out into California. And those European arrivals in the mid-19th century encountered additional peoples coming eastward from Asia, settling in California. Initially the Chinese, later the Japanese, other Southeast Asians coming in to produce in California, here in the 20th and 21st century, the most ethnically diverse place in the United States. Ever since the census year of 2000, there has been no majority population, but every member of the population of California has been a part of one minority group or another. And within these various so-called minority groups, whether they are European Americans or Asian Americans or Hispanic Americans, There are great varieties within those varieties. And of course, we have to recognize that this diversity has been the source of a great deal of conflict in California, where fault lines, social, political, cultural, have developed and caused a great deal of suffering, shall we say, certainly among the groups in the 19th century and throughout the 20th century, and yes, I'm afraid into the 21st as well. Well, Holy Land, similar, crossroads of three continents, of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And people have come from all of those directions, settling into Israel, conquering that area, coming out of these different areas at various times, conflicted and contested with other groups that are there. It's a very complex history. We'll be talking about that in a subsequent presentation. Within Israel today, there is a more diverse population than you might imagine. More than 100 different national origin people, or people of 100 different nationalities, are represented within the population of Israel today. And within whatever major ethnic division you wish to identify, there are diversities within diversities among the Christian minority, among the Jewish majority, or the Muslim minority. There are major diversities within diversity. And I don't need to tell you that just as in California history, where there have been fault lines developing between and among these various groups, certainly that's also been the case in the history, the conflicted history of the Holy Land. Well, in spite of these remarkable parallels between California and the Holy Land, there also happen to be a few minor differences. For example, the size between these two places is radically different. To make it simple, California is big and the Holy Land is little. California encompasses some 160,000 square miles. Israel, meaning the area that is internationally recognized as Israel and not including the Palestinian territories, covers about 8,000 square miles of the Earth's surface. That means California is 20 times larger than the Holy Land. That means the Holy Land, or Israel, could fit 20 times inside the state of California. That means that the Holy Land, Israel, occupying 8,000 square miles, could fit within one of our California counties, namely Kern County, Bakersfield. That county alone, highlighted here in red, covers about 8,000 square miles, the same territory as the nation of Israel. And the distances for travel in Israel are remarkably limited compared to here in California. Well, let's make some comparisons. If you were to drive from the southern tip of Israel, down there on the Bay of Aqaba, which is, by the way, a great bird watching spot, if you were to travel from the southern tip of Israel up to the northern border with Lebanon, you would travel about 270 miles. That would compare here in California if you were to drive up Highway 101 from San Francisco up to Eureka. That's about a 270-mile drive. If you were to drive from the Mediterranean Sea across Israel at its widest point, you would travel about 70 miles. That would be like here in California if we traveled along I-80 from San Francisco to Davis. San Francisco to Davis is about 80 miles driving on the freeway. It's about 80 miles across the entire country of Israel. I think you get the point. Big versus little. The second difference is in the population, both the numbers and the density of the population. Here in the Golden State, currently we have about 38 million people distributed over our territory, equaling about 240 people per square mile. Not too crowded when you average it out like that. In the Holy Land, Israel's population currently is about, within the proper boundaries of Israel, 7.8 million people. That's about a fifth of what our population here is in California, much more densely packed at 800 people per square mile. If you include also the Palestinian territories currently under Israeli occupation, That includes another 4 million people, with a much more densely packed population of greater than 1,000 people per square mile. So the Golden State is not only much larger geographically than Israel, but also our population is far greater than that of Israel, even if you throw in the Palestinian territories. The third difference, well, a difference and a similarity, is the image between the Golden State and the Holy Land. There is a similarity here in that both of these places have enjoyed considerable PR, a great deal of imagining of what life would be like, what life is like in these two places. In both cases, the Holy Land and the Golden State, there has been a sense of this as the promised land. Certainly that was true for the Jews coming into Israel. It was the land promised to them by God. In California, there's also been a sense of the promised land, a land that offers something that you couldn't find back home, and therefore you are attracted to it, this California dream. But and there's also a parallel, by the way, in the migration. Of course, into Israel, you think about the great migration of people under Moses' leadership coming back out of slavery in Egypt into the promised land, and that's called the Exodus. Well, in California, many of these migrations that have occurred over the years have also been described as a kind of exodus. For example, you may remember the Great Depression, Dust Bowl refugees coming across on Route 66, a la the Jodes of Grapes of Wrath. One of the photographers who chronicled that migration, Dorothea Lange, titled her book on the migration of the Okies and the Arkies into California, The American Exodus, drawing the parallel with the Holy Land. So there are similarities there in that sense of something being promised. There's a parallel in the sense of a kind of an exodus going to realize that promise, but there the similarity ends. The image of the Golden State, the promise of the California dream, has always been decidedly earthly, secular, physical, shall we say. And thinking about that last couple of days, how to express that, I came up with these 4 W's to summarize what kind of earthly paradise California is offering. And the 4 W's are, if you'll pardon me from a male point of view, wealth, warmth, women, and wine. And by that I mean wealth promised in California, that's the Golden State. It's the land of economic opportunity, going back to the gold rush down through Steve Jobs and the Apple Corporation, the largest company in the history of the planet. Warmth, well, that's sunny California. That's the promise of the good life in the eternal sunshine of California. The women, well, that refers to the romance of California. The California girls, well, are the California surfers, or the Hollywood starlets and stars. Something is beckoning you in a romantic way in California. And the wine, the 4th W, well, that suggests the California cuisine, the healthfulness of life in California, where we grow our own, all of these great crops of fruits and vegetables and nuts, and those premium wine grapes as well. So the image of California has been decidedly earthy, sensual, earthbound. But the image of the Holy Land, by definition, is something more ethereal. It's a promise not of an earthly paradise, but of intimations of a heavenly paradise, where the boundary between this world and the heavenly world has grown thin. It's a thin place where you can experience more deeply, more richly the presence of God, who seems to have drawn near to humankind in this land. For Jews, it is the holiest place of all, promised to them by God, the land of the patriarchs, the land of refuge in a hostile and threatening world. The holiest place in Judaism is in the Holy Land. It is Jerusalem's western wall, bounding the site of Solomon's temple. For Muslims, Jerusalem is the 3rd holiest site in all of Islam. This is where the Prophet Muhammad came to experience what is known as his night journey, where he traveled to the heavens and met Allah and came back to earth with a message for his followers. For Christians, it is, of course, the holiest place on the planet, because here is where the incarnation occurred. Here is the land where God took human form and walked among us, living and dying and rising again. So the image here, decidedly different, I think, between the Golden State, paradise on earth, and the Holy Land, offering a paradise beyond and glimpses thereinto. Well, I'll end with a question. Being a land sacred to about half the human race, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Think about that. And I suppose the answer to that question lies really in the history of what's happened there. And it's to that history that we'll be turning in our second presentation. Thank you very much.